Hello, everybody. Welcome to wood graining with Karps. So we're going to go over a couple different mediums to do successful wood grain. And all the people here in this course today are excited to learn. I have the materials. We'll be going over cloth. We'll be going over like fabric. Yeah. Then together what we're going to do is we're going to create our own wood grain on foam, which is a common application for plastidip shields. So let's get started. Everybody want to get started? Yeah? Sweet. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is freak out because I have no paper. Oh my gosh, one second. Tight. All right. So this is all something we can do together, and I recommend it. If all of you have either have a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper, okay? All right. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over what has been explained to me as being called the 5 dots. Okay, 5 dots. Has anybody heard about the 5 dots for wood graining? It's super simple and it makes things a breeze. I'm going to do this in Sharpie so it's easier to see. So let's say we've got our box here. So this is our like, this is like a wood grain panel, right? There you go, you see my panel? So what we do is we're going to start off with a dot, like a circle, right there. You guys all put a circle on the bottom left of your page. I did it opposite on the camera here. So we have a piece of paper and then we have a circle on the bottom left, well, bottom left for you guys. So next what we're going to do is we're going to create 5 dots. This is a very small one, but you guys can do it on a bigger piece of paper if you want. Or we create imaginary dots. We create evenly spaced dots to the left of our bottom dot. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is my imaginary one, it's 5. If this is a medium, oh, you can't see, can you? That's the 5th dot. If you're doing this on a medium where you can't create like an imaginary one, or you're doing this where if I put that dot here, it would be a detriment to your art piece, just pretend it exists, okay? Now there's 5 more dots. So there's actually 10 dots. So I don't know why it's called 5 dots, but here we go. These dots are now going to be done directly above this circle here. But instead of being done evenly spaced, they're going to be further apart than the last one. So the first one's going to start close, and then we're going to do it spaced out, further, until it's like, you know, this would be the 5th dot. So in such a small space, we're doing 4 here. But you can create variations to the 5 dots based on the size of your piece, really. So there's not really a rule here. It's just kind of the basic structure here. You could make 11 dots, you know, or 3 dots. Or if you really want to do a really close-up version of wood grain, I had an example. But like this one's real close up, right? There's not even a center dot. That center dot would be like right here, right? So you use these 5 dots in kind of like a perspective to your art piece. Now what we're going to do with these 5 dots is we're going to start making like ellipses or like ovals on our piece, connecting these dots. So these dots are going to be connected in like an oval here. You see? I have like a little avocado now. Yeah. And then what I do is I guess what? I do it again. You wouldn't believe it. So you create this kind of like egg shape, and see how I would have gone off the page here? I just kind of like imagined I went off the page with my pen. but I didn't go off the page because I don't want to draw on this table. And then guess what? You do it again, but you see how these are getting larger, and they're becoming kind of more narrow based on their size or like mass here. So we're creating a much larger one. All right, how's everybody's 5 dots? Did they come out pretty nice? You guys, can I see them? Yeah, that's darn good. Yeah, darn good. Okay, so the only critique I would have is probably my fault for not clarifying. We want these not to be circles. So each of these 5 dots on the upper portion are going to be larger than the last one. And again, there's no like correct way to do it because I have something I wrote. Okay, so all right, here's what I wrote last night for this instance specifically. Don't feel pressure about this one. It's okay to make mistakes because wood grain exists in nature and nature makes small mistakes and impurities, right? So it's kind of like part of it is to not do it perfectly. If your focus is trying to do it perfectly, you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? Cool. So yeah, so we can create kind of inconsistencies with this, but this is the basic structure of the 5 dots here is to create 5 dots on the left and then 5 dots that are more spaced out than the last one on the top. Is everybody kind of clear with the 5 dot structure? Yeah, cool. I know that's a breeze, but it really is. It's if you didn't know how to do it, I imagine you guys have all done wood grain at some point, just kind of like sketched it out. Or really? Wow, oh, awesome. Well, this is a really easy way to do it. And then there's variations you can do with it. Let's pretend this doesn't exist. I'll do it real quick again. But let's kick it up a notch, shall we? Let's do two of them. There we go. So now I'm going to do a 5 dots here, and I'm going to do a 5 dots here. Isn't that crazy? So now, yeah, so I'm going to do my 5 dots directly to the left, roughly about the same size distance. I'm going to do 4 dots here because of how small this is. And then I have my 5 dots here, and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing over on this side here. So an application of this could be that they're just on the same panel, right? Let's say we're making like a wood grain for a shield and they're on the same panel. We want to change it up. Not every single thing can be, hey, I've got this knot on the bottom left, right? But the 5 dots can really be applied anywhere here. So I'm gonna do it kind of quickly here. I imagine you guys, please, I encourage you to do the same thing. Shouldn't have done that. See here? This is an example of like a wooden panel that you can do. I often see things, the wood grain be going the same direction on shields, but some of the best plastidip shields that I've seen, there's always like one panel that's just not going the same direction, and it's kind of like an eyesore, but in a really good way. You know what I mean? I'll give you guys examples later. I'll post some of my favorite wood grained examples in in the event page. But yeah, let's say this panel was actually going like, you know, this way on the wood grain shield. Might be a neat thing to throw in. Yeah, so you guys get the basic point of the 5 dots. This can really be done anywhere. You can make them real big. You know what I mean? Very quick, easy, simple. Okay. I think that's it for the 5 dots, because to be honest, I do have one thing to add on to the 5 dots. So like I said, there's a lot of impurities, and this is a very simple, the wood grain is very simple, large circles. Let's change it up even more. So we're not limited to just doing these giant circles, we can do the 5 dots in another interesting way. And I'd like for you guys to do this with me if you can. We're going to do 5 dots, same thing, 5 dots, same distance, much larger. I'm doing it bigger now. But this time, instead of doing complete circles and making this first, well, maybe we'll make this first avocado. I always like to make the first one regular. But then what I want to do is I want to kind of wavy it up a little bit. And I'm actually going to add kind of like a little bit of a shape to it here. You see? See how I've done this? So this is something you can throw in. I find it really easy to follow that shape that you've created after the first one. So when you create your ellipses here, just kind of follow the shape that you've created. See what I mean? And like, let's say this one, I actually don't like how symmetrical this is right now. This feels really symmetrical to me. It feels like kind of like a mound. Well, further on with this, I can always just change it up. Maybe let's ignore that little divot. Now, I don't have to follow that. I can just follow this. But I still want to follow this one, but maybe I want to do it a little higher up now. See what I mean? There's a lot of room to change things around, especially when it gets wavy. Now, in my opinion, I think that in a lot of times, simpler can be real good. It can be better than doing it more complicated, depending on the medium that you're choosing to use. I think if it's just like a two-dimensional thing, simpler ends up looking like a real quick cartoon sketch, and it ends up not looking as good. Again, everyone has their preference. But we want to try to find a middle ground when we're working on a project like plastidip or on fabric. Because if we do too complicated on fabric, and we'll get into fabric later, we get too complicated on fabric, it ends up being a nightmare time-wise, a lot more room for error. And then even for plastidip, the more complicated you get, you're going to spend a lot more work. And I'll go it a little further when we talk about plastidip. But if we do it a little too complicated, a lot of textures going on, it can actually end up failing for our game because of the roughness of the foam. But again, we'll get into that later. But as far as like simplicity versus complicated work, when we add these waves and stuff, we want to be sure that we're, as far as our base pattern goes, we're kind of planning ahead based on our medium. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna finish that off. I liked it. So next, we're gonna talk about cloth and its applications. So I said this right out the gate, but a common application for using cloth is shield covers. Cloth shield covers are going to be about the most abundant thing in our game as far as equipment. I guess the only other one would be sword covers, right? And I bet those of you who are here have seen on the field, a lot of times people just have blank shield covers. They're just all black. And no shame to anybody who has just a really simple shield cover, but shields are commonly and historically either metal or wood, right? Commonly wood. And we have an opportunity to very easily spruce up our shield by making it wood grain. It's a very easy thing, especially for a new person, to be able to do to really influence their kit and get a taste of how arts and science can be entered into our foam fighting game. You know what I mean? And that can be done as easily as a pen, a Sharpie. A Sharpie actually lasts for a really long time. I mean, imagine anybody who's accidentally Sharpied their clothes or something, right? I can't tell you, I'm actually nervous wearing this white tabard right now around, you know, the paint and the Sharpies that are in this room. But for a brand new person that doesn't have as much materials or tools or resources to their name, a felt pen, a permanent one, will cost you like $2, $3, depending on where you're going. You know what I mean? Or dollar store or whatever. You can find a knockoff Sharpie. It'll be like a Sharpie or something. But and that can be done really easily the same way we just did it here. We did it with this without any other additional things, just a quick Sharpie. But there's ways that even you can spruce that up. I have examples here of wood grain on, ow, that's hot still. Okay, one second. Sorry, I have a hot knife on the table and it was still hot. Okay. So these are examples of wood grain painters on fabric. This is just Sharpie. It's very easy. I mean, it doesn't look super great, but if you were to, you know, change up the color, let's say the fabric here was brown or was on your black shield, and instead of using like a black Sharpie, you used white. And there's actually an alternative to Sharpie that I recommend. It's these paint pens. I don't know if anybody's has anybody used a paint pen before? Super easy. They're also very cheap and they last longer than Sharpie on fabric. They'll typically be acrylic, right? It doesn't say it on here, but I imagine it's a acrylic base. Regardless, super neat, and they can yield really positive results because I think that you guys should wash your things. And Sharpie won't last as long as if you were to use paint on your things. There's other ways you can make them last even longer, but paint's a good way to do that. And I've done that, for example, here. You can see the difference between Sharpie and a paint pen, right? So let's talk about it, because this right here, regardless of what medium you're gonna do, is the very first step of doing wood grain, the 5 dots. And you're going to have to do this at some point, unless you get really good at guessing and really stick into memory of what your wood grain is going to be. You're going to have to draw it on your medium. There's multiple ways you can do that. A lot of people use like pencil, or it depends on the medium. For Sharpie, I'll just use Sharpie if it's something quick, and I can cover it. And then right here, much more faint, but I use chalk for this. I don't know if a lot of you guys are sewers, but chalk is a wonderful way to do this because it washes out. That's the big thing. You can get your wood grain and apply it with chalk. I don't have an example of it on me. It's upstairs, but they're very inexpensive. You can even really use like any kind of chalk. Just be light with it. And the same thing with Sharpie. If you don't have chalk and you are desperate, you can use Sharpie or like a pen really lightly. But if you don't cover it up, it'll show. Is what we're trying to get at here. So with chalk, I would use chalk when, instead of like just using straight pen or paint, I'm planning on using stitching. Oh wait, someone messaged to the chat. Oh, nice. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Everyone can hear me right now, right? So because of how small the class is, feel free just to put your hand up or something and bug me. I'm not gonna check the chat like all the time, but the chat is there if you guys don't wanna have your voice there. So if that's the case, I will still respond, but moving forward, feel free just to bug me and ask. I like to talk to people. But in reference to the chat, a friend of mine is going to make a middle-aged round shield, wood base covered in a thin metal and enamel. I've actually seen like metal overlaid things before. There's a lot of really neat stuff you can do with metal that I like acid etched metal stuff. I follow a lot of like lightsaber groups that do acid etching on them, but in general, it's really nice. There's a lot of stuff you'll see on the Artificer Guild page. I can link you guys to that. People are working on stuff that are similar. Could I use a wood grain marker? Yeah, there are specific pencils, yeah, that wash out to, it's true. Yeah, you can find them at Joann's. There's like a big wall of fun accessories that you can do that help your game. Sewing and crafting is much like if you guys are in any industry in which, or like trade, that you create stuff, tools are such a wonderful thing. And if you have lots of them, your work tends to be better. And overall, it's a real good thing to invest in. And same thing with sewing or painting or so. As far as a wood grain pencil, I'm actually unfamiliar with a wood grain marker. What, Cresteli, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, we used wood grain markers. They're for touching up, like if you put a dent in your wood and the color is different.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, because those are wood toned markers, and I have used them on fabric before. When we were my friend's pop-up dome tent, she wanted to decorate it, and some of the colors she needed were brown, And so we got those brown wood grained markers and we used that to color it in. She has scullies and all sorts of things on the different sides of her dome tent. Really
Yeah.
looks amazing. But we used markers, Sharpie markers, and then those wood grained because we needed browns. Different.
Yeah, I have actually. Now I know what you're talking about. I have used those for like furniture that have been dinged up a little bit, and it's real neat. If you've got it, use it. You know.
Yeah, I have them because I'm refinishing my harp, and it's yeah, it gets whacked into stuff. So
it's neat to use a lot of different coloring too. So like when you do something like this wood grain here, if you want to change it up, you don't have to like just do a real simple black Sharpie on your fabric. You can do like a black or then a brown, or honestly, I've seen cool stuff done on fabric where the wood is like, or the base is like a brown or a light brown, and people will use like greens or even blues or whatever. Let me give you an example of something. So this is like a shield where the wood is silver and the inside is gold. And it actually comes out really, really nice. So don't be afraid to change it up with colors. And if you have access to all kinds of browns, play around with it, you know. You can get some really cool patterns and blends in there maybe a little bit. Even you can use, I'd love to see if it was like paint penned over with a darker color and then maybe highlighted on the inside with a lighter color. You know, that would be real neat. What are we on? We're on covering a chalk and then stitching. Yeah, so we're gonna use pen for things that we want the pen to show, or we're gonna cover the pen, and chalk for if we don't want to see the dang wood grain anymore other than what we're covering it with. And here's a couple different stitches that I'm gonna show you guys that I use. My machine's upstairs, and if you guys really want to contact me via like private message, I'll go over the stitchings with you, but I'm just gonna give you examples of them for ease of time. So what I have here is I have like a real simple zigzag stitch here. This is all messy. I should have cleaned it up a little bit, but whatever. So this is just like a single zigzag, not much very quick even, that I went around this with. I used a color that's different than the base, because if you use the same color, you'll actually get some really cool subtlety, which I've seen, but if you want it to actually show from afar, you're gonna wanna have contrasting colors. Here's just like a single, I'm just gonna actually move this around. Here's like just a single stitch. You see, I have this single stitch going. This is good for thinner stuff. And then next to it, I have just two straight stitches side by side. And then I didn't keep them straight. You have the option to keep it straight, or, you know, bring it closer to your other stitch. It's just really, you're creating inconsistencies or like impurities, and they can, you know, change your project if you want them to go that way. Here I have a thicker zigzag stitch. This is one that I went over multiple times. So we have examples of me going over it one time here, just one time. And the side here, that's 2 times. Wow, I'm not next to the camera. This is just 2 times, so it's a little thicker. And then I have a 3rd time, which is your, you know, your real bold stitching. This doesn't take that long. The more you stitch and the wider your stitches are, they tend to take longer. So if you're looking for a super quick project, filling in your wood grain using like a zigzag is going to be kind of the longer route. But that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Oh, I was going to go over this. So I gave an example and I pointed it out right here. So I made a mistake here. I made it on purpose, but I made a mistake. If you can see it, yeah. So if you can see here, there's a line that goes through these like up and down stitches, right? So this up and down technique right here is one that I see commonly used when it comes to plastidip. It's actually my preferred method when it comes to using plastidip things. I would imagine this would be kind of a nightmare when it comes to stitching, doing this, because you're gonna have to like, you know, reset and open up and go back and forth. It's gonna take a long time. That's not to say that it can't be done. I've never seen it done, but it can be. But if you are going to be doing these up and down things, if you use marker or something that's permanent underneath it, it's going to show. So that's something you want to avoid. So if you're planning on doing this, even if it's just paint that you're going to use to do this method, or a pen or stitching, use chalk. Chalk's going to be better for that for sure. And that sounds like a no-brainer, but let's be clear about it. So that's it for like the wood graining itself. What I would like to cover now is a very quick and easy way to make your wood paneling really cool. So on the flip side of this, I give an example of it torn because, yeah. So this is actually 2 pieces of fabric that I have here. And I've sewn them down the middle here. Oh, I've sewn them down the middle here to create, and it's kind of, I know it's hard to see on the film here, but this is actually one long stitch all the way down. This looks really good on a shield, like really good. You don't have to create the like actual panels using just one big long thick line. You can actually just sew it up. And this is an example of 2 pieces that I've attached together. But I have an example, and it is right. Gosh, I hope it's right here. Well, I don't have to have it right now. This doesn't have to be torn apart. You can actually just fold it. If you fold it and then pinch it, you keep the structural integrity of your fabric just by, I don't know how to do it. I'll show you. Let's say I were just to fold this, and then I can just do my stitch right across here. That way there's no actual break in my fabric. So if the stitch ever goes out, I just restitch it or something. It'll only come out a little bit. I have an example upstairs where I created multiple panels. But if you plan on doing this, like let's say you were to apply it on your shield, let's say your shield's 3 feet by 3 feet and it's like a square. You want to make it just a little larger or wider anyway. So that way when you pinch it and you fold it and you do your stitch right up and down it, it's going to shrink just a little bit. Now, this is not a very strong stitch, as many of you are going to look at it and you go, why would I put that on my shield? Well, so the thing is I use this stitch because the shield doesn't often take that much damage, even though it's blocking things. I don't really have these stitches come out, especially if you just use the fold method. But the problem is if I was to make this stitch stronger by like, I don't know, doing a flat seam here, I'm going to be taking away from that effect that I want from doing the paneling. No longer am I just going to have one single seam right here, but I'm going to have a long stitch right down the middle, which you're not going to, it's not on wood grain, you know what I mean? So that would be a way to get it stronger, but you take away from the actual aesthetic effect. So that's really one up to you. If you do it, I recommend you making it the same stitching, like color-wise. I almost always, whenever I do this, I do a stitching that is similar to the color of my wood grain itself, because shields kind of stretch out a little bit. You can kind of see the stitching in the inside, you know what I mean? It's kind of an additional effect, which I think is neat. But again, preference. I gave an example of doing this, but then also adding like paint across the edge of it. This is up to you. Personally, I don't think it's necessary. I think it ends up making it look worse. But if you wanted to do something like this to create bolder panels on fabric, you're welcome to. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about anything we've been talking about so far? I know I didn't give a break last time. Last category, whatever. No? We're all good? Wonderful. Okay, so that's fabric. I didn't break an example of it here today, but if those of you who are familiar with applique, you can kind of create a really cool applique effect using wood grain by doing multiple layers. I didn't do it here because I didn't have the prep time, to be honest with you. But if you wanted to, you can create one layer of your circle here in one color, and then applique it on to the next layer, and then applique it on to the next layer like a big old sandwich. That's absolutely an avenue you can go. You have the opportunity there when it comes to fabric to change up your colors as well, or even the textures of the fabric itself. Some of the coolest wood grains I've seen was people utilizing the coarseness of their linen. And it's really neat. It's something I encourage you all, if you are planning on doing wood grain, to play around with. There's a lot of very subtle things that can really make your wood grain when it comes to fabric. Because you can't really, you can paint on fabric, it's just kind of like a canvas at that point. But if you want to do it just using fabric as a medium, then yeah, play around with different fabric textures as well. I'm not going to do a whole guide on applique. That'll be for another video, not today. All right, so that is cloth. We talked about that. We talked about panels. Oh, part of the reason why you would want to tear this, or when I say tear, part of the reason why you would want to sew things together like this is if you were, for example, using different colors for your panels, or if you didn't have enough of one fabric. I know I'm a Bellegrim on a budget. I try to think that way constantly. But if you, let's say you don't have fabric shaped, or maybe you're just making this out of scrap and you want to do your wood paneling, that would be an example of when you would want to be sewing these things together. But I would recommend, if you have all the fabric there and you want it to be one color, just to use the fold method. And I actually have, my phone died? Rip. Sorry, we don't have this camera anymore, but I'll just use this one. But yeah, I recommend just using the fold, pinch, and sew method if you're doing one color. All right, so now we're gonna go into the meat and the potatoes of the event here. My favorite, and that is plastidip. Okay, so I'm gonna get a little more light in here so I can show you. Where are my plastidip examples? So I'll be honest, the last plastidip, and I would say the best plastidip I've done was, I don't have anymore. It was for somebody else. So I'm going to use examples from in-home, in the garage, shields that have wood grain on them. And again, I reference this one. This is an example of a shield with a wood grain. It creates a lot of depth for your plastidip shields or weapons. There's plastidip weapons I have that you can do wood grain on. Like you want to make a wooden club or something, that's a really cool application for it. Of course, they need to be fabric covered for any part that is strike surface legal. But yeah, those are cool applications for it. So we have examples, dots, foam. Okay, so I'm going to go over the tools that I think are not necessarily necessary for the project, but ones that if you have, the project's going to be so much easier for you. It's also going to produce just really nice results. I'm going to just go around my table here and see. Probably the best one that you're going to have for foam is a soldering iron or like a hot knife. It's got a bunch of different attachments on kits. And up until about an hour or two ago, I was using like a $12 soldering iron that I picked up at like Amazon. But it broke. I was going to have two for today, but I only have this really nice one. But like even ones like this, you get for 25 bucks on, you know, and they've got all the different attachments. I personally like 2 different attachments. For today, there's an attachment that is super nice, and that's this box cutter one. And we'll get into this one right here. Box cutter, especially these ones that are extendable like this, are going to be your best friend when it comes to foam work in general. Well, everyone's got their favorite tool, but this is typically, like, it's actually the knife of foam fighting or foam making. But yeah, if you get the ones that extend, I have an example of one here that is like a little shorty guy. This is useful for very limited things in foam. I can't really do much. I can't foam cut with it. I can't normally get through the foam that I'm trying to cut because the foam's thicker than this little thing has. So try to do one like this, get it a little thicker than the foam I'm cutting. And a sharp knife will do you wonders. So the reason why I use this one is because it's hot. It's better than sharp, in my opinion, because this is plastic. Foam is just plastic, and it melts away if you use hot. Yeah, this is an example of a foam shield that we worked on, the last one. This is owned by Igwa. This is in Kuma's screen, if you guys can see that. Can you guys see? I know the cameras, it's hard to capture over Zoom, but this is an example of wood graining techniques used on a plastidip shield. Yeah. So yeah, this is my hot, thank you Kuma for showing us all that. I appreciate it because I didn't have a better example. I really don't. That one's the best one I got. Knife, hot knife. Oh, let's talk about safety real quick. When we talk about tools, we should also include safety. I feel like a bad guy right now because I actually don't have my really good masks. But you want to have masks that are rated to where you can withstand melting plastic because it's poisonous. And you will suffer long-term effects if you don't cover up. Because when we do plastidip work, yes, use a good one. Just honestly, like everything. Wear a helmet and just use as best as you can, honestly. Of course, the choice is up to you, but I would be sad if any of my friends were using improper safety equipment. I also recommend gloves for most things, especially when you're dealing with box cutters. If you're not, and I don't challenge anybody to go, oh, I'm too good, I don't need to wear gloves. But gloves will do you wonders on and off the field. Where was going with? Yeah, safety equipment. Today I'm using bad stuff. I'm using a cloth mask that has a filter in it, and I'm using an extra filter one. So shame on me, yes. The last tool that I think, there's two more tools. But you're gonna need, this is a heat gun. Heat gun is awesome. It's before I was using a heat gun, I was using a hair dryer, which is something that you can use. A hair dryer is going to be, well, even a heat gun, it's going to use to cure glue quicker. You can use it to seal up foam because we're going to be cutting into foam for things. So we want to be able to seal it off so that way when we paint over it, the foam's just not going to absorb every single bit of paint or glue that we put on it. It's also really cool for opening up like incisions, and I'll show you a neat trick with that here in a minute. As well as, it looks cool. It looks like a Star Trek phaser. So like, why wouldn't you want one? And like hair dryer, basically. It's really neat. And a hair dryer doubles as a hair dryer if you guys have one. So that's a neat trick. And the last tool is a rotary tool. This one's battery powered. So this is like a rechargeable battery one. If you were to be like a beginner into one, I would recommend grabbing one of these. But in my opinion, a higher powered one that's corded is going to be a lot better for you. Because a lot of times I'll be out here, if I'm doing a shield, I'll be out here for 3 hours with one of these. And the battery doesn't last 3 hours on full power. And it doesn't actually stay at full power for 3 hours either. So invest in a corded one if you're going to. But this is going to be used to smooth out foam or create different textures. I'll give an example of this one. We create textures like this in them with the rotary tool. Or I have other examples like textures on the inside here. Rotary tool can also be used for getting different textures out of your foam. Like depending on the attachment. The one that we're going to be using most commonly is a high grit conical attachment here. But examples, I've used ones that's like a wire brush one. I think it's like my second favorite. I'll use to get really coarse looking, not applicable to wood grain. I guess you could maybe, but not technically applicable. But then we get into the more detailed work I do on my plastidip, the more likely it is to fail at weapons check. We have a rule, and I'm saying this also for just so you know, Crestia, right? Crestia? I keep trying to add an L. Where we can actually hit each other with our shields anywhere but the faces. We can just like really rail each other, which when we're a foam game, but there's still aggression there. But the shields have to be not coarse. So if I like hit it with my hand and it hurts, I can't do it, fails. And if it's so coarse, like there's a sandpapery kind of texture to it, it fails because it's going to hurt somebody, and we value safety over everything. So the more detail work you're going to do with your plastidip projects, the higher likelihood they're not going to pass. So that's just a warning. Yeah, so those are all my tools, and we're going to get to making an example of foam. Give me 1 second. I really wanted that camera to be working. I'm going to try to buy some time and recharge my phone real. Oh, wait. Yeah. I'm going to try to get that camera up and running for my hands really quick. It's really going to do wonders here. Join meetings. Okay, so I think we got this. Sweet, I'm excited. Okay, so we have a foam panel right here that I'm going to make some wood grain on. So what's my first step? I want to plan it out, right? So what am I going to do here? What is this? What am I making? Let's say it's a shield. Let's say I'm just going to do like this. Let's say this full thing was a shield. And I'm just looking at a part of it right now. So imagine I'm doing a much larger foam work, but this is just kind of like a small part, and my medium is a larger shield. So maybe I'm going to have, like, this is a part of the panel, right? This is like where the panel would be. And then this is like one panel, the wood grain, and then this is just a little bit of the other one. So I'm kind of working on a 1 1/4 panel. So let's start with our 5 dots here. What did I do it over here, right? That was for you guys. So I do my 5 dot, 1, 2, 3. It's only gonna be 3 dots today, but let's say 4, 5. See, this is an example where I can't put the other dots on the other side. So I'm just gonna kind of pretend they're there. And then I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's do it a little wavier. I'm gonna start with just a regular base. Oh, as a note, now this isn't something that happens all the time. Actually, I just experienced this in my last project. It actually wasn't even my project, it was somebody else watching this project. But I think Sharpie eats away at foam a little bit. And it might just be the pressure that people put on, or maybe a combination of the pressure you use when you mark up your foam, as well as what's in a Sharpie in general. But I was looking at somebody who just did the Sharpie part of wood grain, and I noticed some clear texture differences. In fact, I even feel it right now for this one that I put a little bit more pressure on. So when you're applying to foam, kind of plan it out in your head before you even put the Sharpie on there. And foam isn't super forgiving. So though you can, you know, that's another thing to remember. Don't worry about making a little bit of mistakes with wood grain. We talked about that. But still have a little bit of a plan, because you don't want to buy a bunch of foam and then ruin it just because you're like, well, I'll just Sharpie. Can't really erase the Sharpie. So yeah, so it's, right now, let's do the wavy bit. Let's do like this. This is like a little sharp of a wavy bit, but let's go with it. So something like this. See how I made like a little mistake here. It's hard to see. But anyway, I just kind of created the basic shape. So I'm still going with it, even if I make a very small mistake. So long as I'm light on my hands with the Sharpie, it should be good. So let's go here. So I'm around my thing here. Let's go here. Something like this is okay for me to go over a little bit, because we're not going to see this because it's going to be covered with plastidip. You know what I mean? As long as you're doing it lightly, you can change it up when you see it. And then this one here, wood grain. And then we have an example. We can do maybe a very simple wood grain here. Maybe the dot is like somewhere way over here, and we just have like a smaller example of it here. Okay. And this is large. Let's see. All right, so let's make our wood grain. So there's 2 different techniques, and I'm going to show my examples now that I use. So I have a step-by-step actually. Let's use my step-by-step. More texture rough, drumming for more texture, feet running on edges. Sweet. So now that we have this here, we have 2 options at this step. The first option is, well, we can just use our hot knife for this, and we'll do our hot knife over on this side, and we'll do the one I want to do on this side. But for our hot knife one, it's as easy as me finding my pliers really quick. I like to remove the bits from my hot knife very delicately with like a pair of pliers, because I have grabbed at them when they're hot, and I have trust issues with them a little bit. So I changed my attachment to one that's a little thicker. This is kind of like a standard one. It's got a little bit of a beveled edge to it, but it's not super sharp. And I'm going to turn on my hot knife. If you have a hot knife that has an adjustable temperature, just find one that you like and get used to it. I'd say do tests on it before you use it for the first time, but just play around with it and see what ones you like. And we're going to let that get a little hotter while I show you more examples. I have an example from us just using the hot knife, and we don't do any little incisions like I did before. And this is just the hot knife around here. Do you guys see that? That's without little incisions. This is the hot knife plus rotary tool. This is an example. This is an example of just using incisions. You see this? There's no marks, there's no like straight lines or here. We just use incisions in order to create our wood graining here. And then it's easier to see on this one, but I use a rotary tool here, and we'll go step by step in order to create different textures. So my hot knife is ready. Should be ready anyway. Whenever you're using a hot knife on foam or leather or whatever you're planning on, well, I guess not for using it like a soldering iron, but any burning into things that you're planning on using, I always recommend going up, down, because this is kind of the motion of your hand and how it's most comfortable on the table. If you're like drawing up, down like this, okay? So if you're doing this and you find that you have to like create kind of like you're going this way, move your medium, don't move your hands. Up, down is going to be, you're going to get the most smooth lines out of it. And even if you want rough lines, you'd rather do it on your terms than by doing it by accident. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm going to do an example of, is there any other reason why? This has a bevel, so I think this is pretty obvious, but I'm not going to do it at the tip like upside down. I'm doing it on the bevel to where it's going to be comfortable with my hands. So I'm going to go up and down. The longer time you spend, I know you guys are aching for me just to like stab it in there. I can see it in your guys' life. I'm going to talk about it a little more. The longer you spend, like the more time you spend, the more solid your lines and deep your lines are going to be. So an example here is if I were to go really quick about it, my lines aren't going to be as deep. And this is me. And I can stop at any time if I want to. Don't feel like you're committed to having to do it and that you just did it once, you're done. You can go over it again. Like say I don't think my line was thick enough, I can just go over it again and come here. And then if I want to avoid like really sharp stops like that. So if you can do it in one go for it. But I can just fix it here. And at this point, I'm just twisting my hands to go with the beveled edge here. You guys see how I did this? And so like for this big the panel here, we're going to create like a thicker, much deeper one. So because we want it to look like it's separated. So we're going to do the same thing. This is the easiest one to do, I think. You just go down here. You can have a little bit of a heavier hand and maybe go a little slower. I'm a bigger fan of going faster and just doing it twice, but that's really personal preference. I like faster and doing it twice. Also, if you don't like the cleaner look, I mean, this is like clean-ish, but if you want to, you can always just kind of like wiggle it around, or if you have a beveled edge, you can like add some twists or stops where you're whiting it in certain spots. You see how that's not straight per se, right? And then we can close this off by doing this. If you find that you're not going completely on the lines that you set, don't worry about it too much. Because most of the time, I know I said it before that the Sharpie kind of eats into the foam, but it doesn't eat into the foam the same way that the hot knife is eating into the foam. So the hot knife kind of supersedes the pen in any way because that's permanent. The Sharpie is mostly going to get covered by plastidip. And I say mostly, all the color will be a different color. But yeah, so this is an example of just using, where is it? Just the straight line method here with just a hot knife. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and I'm going to switch this with not my hands. I'm not going to hold onto this real tight because the metal gets more brittle when you're using a soldering iron. The metal gets a lot more brittle when you have it hot. That's actually how I broke my last one, is because I dropped it by accident and it was hot. So it broke right off. And this doesn't need to go in all the, like, real tight. So it's just going to make it harder for you in the future. Let this warm up just a little bit. You can alternatively, and I guess I should do it with a box cutter just for an example really quick. Or maybe like one. Box cutter, right? This is this one I had to break, so it's a little smaller. But I can do this and I can score. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna score these lines here. So if you find that you see ones that are like straight up and down, this is gonna be a lot harder to do the ones that are straight up and down. So you wanna do is you wanna pick kind of like a slight angle. So if it's up and down, you're gonna follow these kind of like this. And you're gonna be making really short incisions. Well, you can change it up, honestly. If you see something that you want them to be a little like taller, you can. You're gonna make ideally shorter incisions and they're gonna be closer together. And like this, I don't know, can everybody see that, kind of, the incisions that I'm making? So the reason why I recommend going sharper, because this is actually kind of like a dull knife. It's actually good to see it in a bad way, I think. You'll get these little dots right above, these like more solid dots. This is where this is being punctured in and being like torn down. And now that I have this ready, I'll show you that exact same thing, but with none of those dots, because it's hot. And it's like butter, honestly. It's like butter when it comes to this stuff. So what you want to do is you want to follow the line that you created going in one direction. So if you see here, you can barely even see it right now, right? Because the dots aren't there. It's better that way, in my opinion. But really, whatever your personal preference is, if you've got only like a duller box cutter, even with a sharper box cutter, it still kind of makes those holes. But if you got a hot one, that's, in my opinion, better. But you want them all to go the same direction, but it's not going to be perfect. It can't all go the same direction because they're going to be side slanted. And if you are going to put them on the page every single time perfect, I don't think that that's possible, but even then I think it's imperfect. So it's supposed to be a little bit imperfect. And if you find yourself in a situation where, oh man, I don't have room to put another one this way, just throw one this way or elongate one of the ones that you already have on like these up and down ones. Because we're not going to see this line that we made. Well, ideally, we're not going to see this line. We're just going to see the incisions. So yeah, I'm going to do that a little bit more, a little quicker here. And I'm going to try to go the same direction that I picked on this first one. So if I do it the other way, it's going to look a little less natural. So it's okay that it's at a little bit of a slant. But I can always just correct it a little bit as I go if I want to. And like, let's say I want to like, I don't know, maybe put a couple longer ones in there just to make it look a little bit more. Did I turn this off? Or make it a little more natural. See, I'm starting to curve in a little bit. I don't want to do that. I can always just correct it, straighten it out, and then just go the other way. So there's room there. If you want to change it up a little bit, you can. Just try to get them to go about the same direction. Because on the next step, we're going to open up these incisions that we're making. And I'm going to do this quicker so I can kind of get through this. These also have removable blades. You can get. I haven't changed this one out, and it's getting a little dull. So it's still going to have some effect on it. But I still prefer this over a fresh one of these. In my opinion, is better than the box cutter, but it's less like readily available. But I'm going to do this quick for us, real quick. You guys can see this, right? Quicker. All right, so that step's done. I'm going to turn this off temporarily. So now we've got my favorite part is we use a heat gun. Well, it's second favorite part actually. Heat gun. So what the heat gun is going to do is going to take these open pores that we just created with the hot knife. And I actually forgot to do it before, but I'm going to put a mask on. So hopefully you guys can hear me. But I'm going to use this hot knife of this heat gun here. I'm going to turn it on. Mine's adjustable, so I try to turn it up as hot as I can go. And then, hopefully you guys can see it, but I'm going to put this almost, not directly on, but about a couple inches above. And you're going to start to see these things pop open. Neat. So you can see how they really popped open, right? Now we have the wood grain. There's a couple spots where I didn't do all the way now that I'm looking at it. So I'm gonna clean it up real quick, just on the ones I didn't do. You can always cut more into this. The heat gun does seal it a little bit, but that doesn't mean you're completely done. You can keep going if you want. And actually, for a second there, it actually makes the foam even more malleable, which I think is kind of neat. Noticing it right now. So you should wear a mask, and wear a mask especially when you're burning the foam in any way, whether it be with a hot knife or with, I should have done with the soldering iron, but. Don't let the tip of this ever touch the foam. It'll ruin your foam and your heat gun. You also have an opportunity, if you're doing something like this on an easy foam sheet, you can just like bend it a little bit to open these up a little bit more so your heat gun can more easily get in there. All right, so second step, and this is one where I recommend you wearing a mask, and I recommend you wear some sort of glasses over your face. Those of you who already have glasses, awesome. But like just a quick pair of glasses or like safety glasses will also do you. You're not gonna be really in any worry of stuff getting in, like taking your eye out, but we're gonna use a rotary tool, and the rotary tool is gonna send foam and dust just everywhere. So we don't wanna do that. So I'm gonna take my rotary tool here. And my goal here is I'm going to be taking it around the outside edges of all my wood grain. If you see, there's a little bit of like well, you created kind of like a canyon, like a divot between the foam, right? So what we want to do is we want to kind of make a slope out of the outside edge. And I kind of wish I kept it on a different one that example that I made for you guys, but like before I plastidip it. But if you see here, it's hard to tell. The inside edge still exists, but the outside edge is going to be divoted a little bit. So I'm going to do that right here for you. I like to do it, we'll start on this one, and I like to do it this direction. Remember, whatever works with your hands best is going to be what you want to prioritize, not like, don't be standing around and moving around. It's going to screw you up. So what I do, it's going to be a little loud for those of you guys. If I'll tell you what, I'll mute my mic really quick. So now here what I've done is I have removed the outside edge of that. You see, we still have the inside, but the outside is now kind of like a slope. We do this for a little bit added texture and depth to our project here. I like to keep the inside edge because if we don't, there's a little less definition. And if we remove the outside edge, it kind of gives us we got to pick one edge, you know what I mean? And I prefer the outside. It can be up to you guys for preference, but that's what I like. I'm going to do it one more time. Well, multiple more times. But. as an addition, this doesn't have to be super smooth. I like to do them when they're a little more smooth and even, so where they, you know, like that. But I'm going to give you guys an example of doing it more rough. That way you can see if you like it aesthetically. Oh, I just noticed that I didn't actually show me doing that. Okay, so you see how this one's a little bit more on the rough end? Yeah, and that's really aesthetic preference. If you guys prefer it a little bit more rough versus the smooth, I guess it's really just the type of shield you're going to be making or whatever you're making. Maybe this is like a barbarian shield and it's been through it, you know, just go ahead and throw maybe a little bit more rough tone in there. Maybe it's like an older shield and it's going through something. But yeah, those are going to be two differences, and that same application is going to be carried over here. But instead, we don't have any edge ridge to remove here, right? Because we didn't make one. So on the other side here, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be roughing up just right above our incisions, just right above our incisions. And an example of that is going to be like this one here, where we're just doing it slightly above here to add a little bit more texture to it. And you know, as a note, at any point, like that's why I made different examples. Like you could stop here if you want to. You know, you could stop there. This is just the ridge and this has been plastidipped and painted, not painted well, but painted. And you know, it's a reasonable shield. If you don't want to add any more, you can welcome to do it. And you could have left it at, you could leave it at this if you want to. More work you put into it, I think the better it comes out. But there is such thing as being too complicated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do the same thing I did on that one here, and I'm going to do it in front of you guys, a little bit closer to the camera this time. I'll pay attention to that. I find myself in a situation where I'm working against myself going up and down now that I have this wave here. So what I want to do is I actually want to start moving this a little bit and going with the grain a little bit. You have two different options. For this one, I watched a couple of videos too, and from what I've noticed and what I prefer is I like to go up and down on this one and move the rotary tool as opposed to moving the medium. But that's your preference. I'll give two examples of that and show you the differences between the two. Okay, so this is the difference between the two here. I hope that you guys can see. This one I used and I went up and down, and it ended up becoming a little bit deeper here and a little bit more like rough. And then on the outside here, if you notice, this one's a little bit more smooth because I followed kind of the same line as I turned this. And those are just two different kind of ways to do the same thing. But that's just your preference. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? I don't think I have to do the whole rest of this because I kind of Martha Stewarted it and I have this. But let's skip to the like last part. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to brush off any excess foam. If it's a shield, you can just give it a good hit or like brush it off. Oh, look at, I gave an example. So I went too deep on this. See how easy this is to break? So if I did this on a shield or something, I can risk the core of the shield being exposed. Or I did it on a weapon. Now the integrity of this is broken. So that's definitely something to consider. If you go too deep, you'll face consequences for it. I think I also folded this too, but yeah, this is something to keep eye for. The thicker foam that you use, this is actually like, it's a little less than a ½ inch. I think this is 3/8 inch EVA foam, but like puzzlemat, this is like cheaper puzzlemat. Regular puzzlemat should be. Anyway, the thickness is going to dictate how deep you're going to go into these things. But let's do the last step. Well, last step with a foam knife, and it's using these things again, or using a sharper box cutter. I'll use a box cutter and one. But now we're going to do, and this is optional, we're going to create this motif here where we create these long lines. Now, I'm not much of a painter. I'll admit to that. I'll own it right now. So the more texture that you add onto your foam using like tools, the less you have to add texture-wise to your project at the end. So this is a good way to create more texture without actually doing anything, because there's a really easy thing that I'll show you guys how to do. I'm not going to go in depth, but it's called black wash or dry brushing or whatever. And then that will fill in a lot of the gaps. That'll fill in a lot of the gaps. So if you create gaps, you'll have more to fill in and therefore have more texture later. So let's do it here really quick. So for here, what I do is I do it within the panels themselves. So it's not going to be just like across the entire board here. I'm going to just create kind of like thin cut lines in here. Now I find when we do it on these ones where we used the up and down marks, this ends up being counterintuitive. It kind of like creates kind of a clash of textures. But it's a method nonetheless. So if you do these thinner than the ones that you made, maybe just like really shallow, maybe a little more spread out apart. Here we go. You see, very subtle. You've created out of texture. You can at this step either decide to not hit it with a heat gun or hit it with a heat gun. I gave an example of hitting it with a heat gun here, so it definitely opens them up, but I'm not going to hit it with a heat gun now. Mind you, if I don't hit it with a heat gun, this means it's going to absorb more paint and, well, actually more plastidip, but plastidip's cheap, and if this is the desired texture you're going for. I do like this style when it's on something that doesn't have these scoring. So like if I were to add these here, yeah, see how that really changes the texture of that very simple wood grain. And then this is one that I'm going to hit with a heat gun real quick. Okay, came out a little bit more. This is how I prefer. This is my favorite wood graining, but I also do really like this without the additional scoring. Preference. And that'll come out something like, but not necessarily this, or this. This is without the scoring. This is just a simple wood grain. This isn't a plastidip tutorial, so I'm not going to go too deep into the plastidip itself, but I hit it with 3 layers of spray on plastidip, like this. Not that exact one. I don't have it on the table. And then after it dries, I hit it with 2 or 3 layers of paints. I'm not going to teach paints today. I will link you guys to a guide if you're very interested in learning about painting on wood grain. But if you want a simple way to do it, you just take 1 or 2 colors of paint, what you want your base wood grain to look like. In this case, it was this cruddy brown paints. And I put it on right here. But I'm going to show you a really, really neat trick just by me doing it because I want to do it. It's called blackwashing. And you take a brush. I'm using just a brush, whatever. Pour yourself some black paint. And you're going to ruin your project really quick, okay? Be gentle with it, but still like, yeah. So you're going to want to do is you're going to cover this in black paint and you're going to wipe it off. So I recommend having like paper towels handy. When it comes to foam, the more rough your foam is going to be, the more a paper towel isn't going to be the best option because it's the little fibers are going to come off on your piece. But that's personal preference. So cover this up real quick, hit it with a good black wash. It doesn't have to cover the entire thing. In fact, I recommend kind of doing like a half-butted version real quick, just to kind of get into the cracks and the crevices. And then you're going to, let's see if this works and I'm not just messing up, just kind of wipe it off. And if it's, I recommend doing this on satin paint. This is matte, but if not, you can always just wet your stuff a little bit and wash to it. It's changed it. It's hard to capture on film, but it definitely adds so much to it. If you're looking an easy way, which I am also looking for an easy way, very easy way to do it. This is a matte paint, but if you're using something that's satin, something a little slicker, it's not going to absorb the paint as much, so you can put a little bit more of a black wash onto it. So if you find yourself, why isn't this paint staying on my darn thing? You can add a little bit more, or you can let it sit for a little while, the black wash, before wiping it off. If you find, like I find here, I actually haven't gotten a lot of the black inside the little crevices here, which is what I'm supposed to be doing. You can also hit it with a smaller paintbrush and just get in those little crevices to really bring out a lot more of your stuff. Or you can even just black wash the lines themselves and just reapply. So yeah, that'll give you like a Woodgrain. Plastidip Woodgrain class, there you go. Does anybody have any questions at all on anything that I went over here today? Let's look at the chat. Nobody in the chat? Does anybody have any questions before I give final remarks? Yes, please.
So when you're using the heat gun, you always do it at those different stages and hit it multiple times, or would you do all of your cutting and with the rotary tool and then do it all at once with the heat gun?
So I don't. There's a reason why I don't. So between the steps, I know you're talking about it. I know exactly what you're talking about because I thought it was the same thing too. It's like you don't have to do it every single time. The reason why I did it today, for multiple reasons, I wanted you guys to see the separation between the scoring. You know how the scoring opens up a little bit? I think it's good at this point to see what else needs to be done with your piece before you start doing the rotary. It also is, you're at a point where you can seal the pores. That's kind of what the heat gun done, is a dual purpose. If it were up to me, we would seal it. Well, we wouldn't have to seal it after the rotary, but we have to seal it after the rotary because the rotary just roughed up our foam. Now we have a bunch of exposed foam, so we have to hit it with the heat gun. But that, to answer your question, is I want to be able to see what the scoring is actually going to do to my project, and then I can hit it with the rotary tool. I didn't mention this, but you can also do similar scoring. This is more of a plastidip thing, but you can do similar scoring on the back of your projects in order to absorb more glue and therefore attach to your stuff better. So it's going to be a similar technique to what we covered here, but you wouldn't necessarily hit it with a heat gun. And that actually goes both ways. If you want your project not to absorb that much of whatever you're putting onto it, hit it with a heat gun, seal it up. If you want it to absorb more, don't hit it with a heat gun. And that's just the situation that you'll be in, that you can make that decision. Any other questions? No? Well, that's wonderful. I am very happy. I'm going to go drink some water, probably. Is there anything else that you guys might want from me while I'm here that pertains to the topic in any way at all? Maybe resources that you guys might want that I can connect you guys with? Would you guys like me to link tutorials that are similar to this to you guys? Yeah, interested? I know, I'm fascinated. There's so much you can do with I like foam especially, but I also do textiles. But foam, especially with Woodgrain, there's so much you can do with foam. And I'll link some cool stuff if you guys are interested in plastidip stuff. The sky's the limit when it comes to this kind of stuff. Yeah, so I'm very happy for you guys to attend. I'm now going to turn off the recording. Okay. Recording off. Recording